Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the San Francisco Board of Supervisors Land Use and Transportation Committee meeting from Monday, February 6, 2017. My name is Mark Farrell. I'll be chairing this committee. I am joined by our committee, is it Vice Chair Supervisor Peskin? And Supervisor Katie Tang. I want to thank Lisa Samara, the clerk of our committee, as well as Charles Kremenak and Adrian Starks from SFGTV for covering this meeting. Madam Clerk, do we have any announcements?
Yes, please make sure to silence all cell phones and electronic devices. Completed speaker cards and copies of any documents to be included as part of the file should be submitted to the clerk. Items acted upon today will appear on the February 14th Board of Supervisors agenda unless otherwise stated.
Okay, thank you very much. With that, Madam Clerk, we call item number 1.
Item number 1 is an ordinance amending the administrative and planning codes to authorize the Entertainment Commission to hold hearings on noise issues related to new construction projects and conversions of hotels and motels within 300 feet, requiring the Planning Department and Commission to consider noise issues when reviewing these projects and making appropriate findings.
Okay, thank you, Madam Clerk. Mr. Johnson, thank you for being at the podium. Ready to roll?
Congratulations on being Chair Farrell, that is. Connor Johnston, Staff 2, Board of Supervisors, President London Breed, and I just have some brief comments and then one short amendment at the request of the Planning Commission. In 2015, the Board of Supervisors unanimously passed President Breed's nightlife preservation legislation, which is protecting San Francisco's music venues and preventing conflicts with their neighbors. The law is fundamentally a three-legged stool, which I will go through very quickly. 1, the law prevents venues from being sued as a legal nuisance if they are operating within the terms of their city permit. 2, it requires landlords and realtors to disclose to new residents before they move in that there is a venue nearby. And 3, the law empowers the Entertainment Commission to hold a hearing with both the developer and the music venue whenever a residential development is proposed within 300 feet of a music venue. And it requires the Planning Commission to consider any recommendations the Entertainment Commission provides about how those two uses can coexist. That last one is fundamentally the most important part of the law. We created a structure to help these different land uses coexist in dense mixed-use neighborhoods by working together on the front end, rather than against each other after the fact when people are unhappy and changing things is much more difficult. The law is, as far as we know, the first of its kind in the country. President Breed's amendments today strengthen it even further. We established the Entertainment Commission's authority to work on residential developments near music venues, but we are realizing the Commission should be involved with hotel development near music venues as well. Recently, the Entertainment Commission has been dealing with conflicts between the Campton Place Hotel in Union Square and the neighboring Love and Propaganda nightlife venue. Likewise, there have been issues with the New Hampton Inn on Jesse Street and its neighbor, the venue Mezzanine. Hotels are complaining to the Entertainment Commission, they're having to refund people's rooms, and they're upset because their TripAdvisor ratings are going down. The Entertainment Commission is having to manage the problems. They're testing to ensure the venues are in compliance with their permits, they're working with the management of the hotel, but they're forced to do all of this after the fact, when we could have instead had these conversations and done the diligence on the front end. President Breed's amendments empower the Entertainment Commission to address coexistence concerns with nightlife and proposed hotels before those hotels are approved. This is a pressing issue. Planning staff report shows that 26 hotel and motel projects are pending, and 17 of those are within 300 feet of a place of entertainment. There are 2 near Ruby Sky, there are 2 near the Temple nightclub, and 2 proposed hotels actually have 3 venues within 300 feet of them. In fact, most new hotels have nightlife venues nearby, in part because our neighborhoods are becoming more mixed use and dense, but also because hotels, by their very nature, want to be near the action. Consider one recent example from Austin, Texas. According to reports, Austin, the national haven for live music, has a situation where the Westin built a hotel next to the Nook Amphitheater and is now suing the Nook for noise coming from their live music. President Breed thinks we can do better. We can protect our nightlife venues and make sure hotels and venues are both good neighbors. Nightlife and live music not only bring almost $1 billion into the local economy and support thousands of jobs, they help define who we are as a city. Ben Blyman, the co-chair of the California Music and Culture Association, which advocates for nightlife in San Francisco, very humbly said our 2015 legislation, quote, entered the annals of nightlife legend. No single piece of legislation has helped SF nightlife more than this in literally decades. it was landmark. And I always like those objective analyses of our legislation. But with these amendments today, I hope you will join President Breed in making that legislation even stronger. And I'll just point out the legislation is supported by SF Travel, the Hotel Council, and it has been unanimously endorsed by the Small Business Commission, the Entertainment Commission, and the Planning Commission. I want to thank Jocelyn Kane, the Executive Director of the Entertainment Commission, who would be here with me today, except she is actually hosting the Nightlife Summit across the quad at the library, which is actually where President Breed is as well. And I also want to thank Diego Sanchez, our staffer from the Planning Department. And he does have one bit of housekeeping. The Planning Commission recommended that we exempt projects that already have planning entitlements as of the date this legislation was introduced, October 4th, 2016, which was my 35th birthday, actually. The gray hair is real. Planning staff estimates there are currently 2 or 3 such projects with entitlements. President Breed supports the Planning Commission's suggested change, and I have copies of that suggested change. I believe it's in your packet as well. But the gist is that Section 116.11F would have added language saying, this Section 116.11 shall not apply to hotel or motel projects that have received a Planning Commission approval by October 4th, 2016. And with that, on President Breed's behalf, supervisors, I would ask for your support, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson, for your eloquent comments and for your gray hair ad libs. Supervisor Peskin.
It was actually scripted.
Through the chair to the representative for President Breed, we will note the time of your birthday, but how many projects are under that grandfathering clause, do you know?
It's as of the time we went to Planning Commission on January 5th, it was 2 or 3. I think Mr. Sanchez would probably know that more accurately today.
Okay, why don't we hear from Planning Department staff?
Mr. Sanchez.
Diego Sanchez, the Planning Department staff. Supervisors, on January 5th, the Planning Commission heard this ordinance that's now before you. The Commission was very much in support of the ordinance. They saw it as an ordinance attempting to solve a real-world problem and as a good balance between the hospitality and nightlife industries. The Planning Commission moved unanimously to adopt a resolution to recommend the proposed ordinance with the modification that was stated to exempt those hotels and motels that have already secured a Planning Department or Planning Commission entitlement as of October 4th, 2016. And this concludes my presentation. I'm available for questions.
Supervisor Peskin, anything more?
No, Mr. Chair, I just, as to how many projects are grandfathered?
3. Apologize, 3.
And the locations of those projects?
1 second, I have. It's actually 2. So 62 First Street and 72 Ellis. The third one had dropped off as of December 31st, 2016.
Thank you.
Okay. No other questions from colleagues. We will open item 1 up for public comment. Anybody wish to publicly comment on item number 1? Okay, seeing none, public comment is closed. So we have a proposed amendment in front of us. Colleagues, do you have a copy of that amendment?
I do. It is an amendment to Section 116.11 sub F that would read as follows. This Section 116.11 shall not apply to hotel or motel projects that have received a Planning Commission approval by October 4th, 2016, and I move that amendment.
Okay, motion by Supervisor Peskin, second by Supervisor Tang. We can take that without objection. Colleagues, motion on the underlying item is amended. Can we have a motion to move that on
I
forward?
would move this item as amended with recommendation to the full board.
Okay, motion by Supervisor Peskin, again, second by Supervisor Tang. We can take that without objection. Thank you very much. Madam Clerk, would you call item number 2?
Item number 2 is a resolution authorizing the acceptance of real property assets from the Office of Community Investment and Infrastructure to the Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development and making appropriate findings.
Okay, thanks very much. With the Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development to speak.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Benjamin McCloskey, Deputy Director for Finance and Administration at the Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development. The item before you today is an additional step necessary to implement previous actions of the Board related to the dissolution of the redevelopment agency. Under state dissolution law, OCII is required to fund and develop a large number of affordable housing units in Trans Bay, Mission Bay, the Shipyard, and the Alice Griffith Hope SF site. OCII owns the land upon which each of the affordable housing developments will be built. The housing will be built and managed by affordable housing developers. Upon completion of each project, OCII is required to transfer ownership of the land to the city for long-term asset management and monitoring of the affordable housing. MoCD services the loan agreements and monitors the affordability restrictions. This resolution and the associated board file describes all of the known assets which will eventually transfer from OCII to the city. Approval of the resolution will allow the Director of Real Estate and the Director of MoCD to accept each parcel as the housing is completed. If there are any additional parcels not currently identified as part of this resolution, we will come back to the board for approval to accept those parcels. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, thank you very much, colleagues. Supervisor Peskin, your name's still on the roster, or is that left over?
It's left over.
Okay. I just want to say, thanks for bringing this forward, obviously in favor of automating this process. I think there are a few things that I'd like to see and have amendments here, and we'll distribute to my colleagues. Because we're going to be giving up case-by-case review here at the Board of Supervisors, I'd like to see, as part of the amendment, require that we have annual reporting back to the Board of Supervisors as well. And also, I don't see anything in the resolution about MoCD honoring the regulatory and financial agreements OCII had previously signed up to. Is that something, could you talk about that as something you guys would be acceptable having in there?
Yes, absolutely. That is part of state law, that those continue to exist, and our office does continue to enforce them.
Okay. Thanks. So those would be the two amendments I would suggest on this item. Colleagues, and apologies for the late notice of distribution. With that, seeing no other questions, we'll open this up to public comment. Anybody wish to comment on item number 2? Okay, seeing none, public comment is now closed.
I'll make a motion then to adopt both of those amendments and then send forward to the full board with positive recommendation.
And if I may, maybe through the chair to the Deputy City Attorney, I assume the First Amendment, even though the resolution is silent, that city and state regulatory agreements would still be in effect. It's just calling it out. Is that correct?
Supervisor, I don't have the language in front of me, although I understand that someone in my office drafted it earlier today. I just didn't get a copy. Give me just a moment.
We'll work out these kinks.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, belt and suspenders, fine with me.
Okay, so motion by Supervisor Tang to accept the amendments and move the underlying item as amended out to the full board with a positive recommendation. Second by Supervisor Peskin. We can take that without objection. Thank you very much. Madam Clerk, would you call item number 3?
Item number 3 is an ordinance amending the planning code to allow amusement arcades in all of Market and Eastern neighborhoods mixed-use districts except for the residential enclave districts and making appropriate findings.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't know who's speaking on this item. Oh, Supervisor Kim's office. Okay.
Good afternoon, Land Use Committee members. April Veneracion Eng from Supervisor Kim's office. We have introduced legislation to update our codes to the current environment of 2017, although we introduced this in 2018. There was legislation passed in 1982 regulating and in some cases prohibiting arcades in the city in San Francisco. And we still have zoning codes that prohibit arcade games in our code. This is something that has come up in other neighborhood commercial districts, I believe, in the Castro and in the Haight previously, and we did the Board of Supervisors cleaned up legislation to allow arcades in those 2 other districts. We are requesting the same for and to allow this in the South of Market in the Service Light Industrial area. We had this before the Planning Commission in the fall. Some neighborhood stakeholders were concerned about this change, and they wanted to be looped into businesses that were planning to participate in the South of Market. And so we had the business operators that were proposing this business reach out to members of the South of Market Business Association, the South Beach Merchants Association, and they have since had those conversations, and we are before you today. The planning department has requested a broader change to our codes for the arcades, and after conversations at the Planning Commission, we decided to just leave it to the South of Market and have the processes that relate to Eastern neighborhoods and Chinatown be encompassed in a further update to the planning code. So I'm actually going to ask for a continuance today because we prepared legislation that speaks just to the South of Market, but we want to make sure to redact all references to the eastern neighborhoods, other parts of the eastern neighborhoods, and a reference to other entertainment uses in the Chinatown mixed-use district and the eastern neighborhoods mixed-use district that we feel should be part of those neighborhood discussions. So ask for a continuance, and because the project sponsor is here, I wanted to present and give a little context and background on the legislation, but to have a cleaned up version of the legislation for your consideration at the committee level.
Okay, so I will turn over in a second to Supervisor Peskin, but in terms of the continuance, how long do you want it in? Call of the chair, or do you want a date specific at this point?
1 week.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Supervisor Peskin?
Thank you, Chair Farrell. And I obviously, subject to public comment, will make the requested motion to continue the item for 1 week. And I just want to say, relative to this issue, on Broadway, these arcades were the place where we had the most homicides, and so there's actually a reason why in certain districts there are controls on them. The 400 block of Broadway, it was the source of a number of homicides in the early 2000s, so it's definitely not a one-size-fits-all solution, and I'm a little concerned that planning is once again coming up with we want to do the same thing everywhere, because that, no disrespect, Mr. Starr, does not make sense.
Okay. Colleagues, any further questions? Okay. We'll open this up to public comment. Anybody wish to comment on item number 3? Oh, you don't have to do public comment, but welcome on board.
Just the housekeeping thing. The Planning Commission heard this on September 29th of last year and recommended to approve with the modification. The modification was based on Supervisor Kim's letter that she gave to the Commission that week or that day, which asked to just limit it to the SLI industrial district. So that is what the Planning Commission agreed to and what should be before you today after the edits are done.
Okay, hold on. Just to be clear, are you suggesting an amendment today, or do we just want to handle this all next week as we have?
I don't believe I can suggest amendments, but the intention of the item before you was to just narrow it to the SLI.
Okay, Supervisor Peskin.
So in the staff recommendation on page 5, where the recommendation is the department recommends approval with modifications, and then you insert in the Chinatown mixed-use districts and in the South of Market and Eastern, although actually you say Easter, but I'm sure you meant to put the N there, Easter neighborhoods mixed-use districts. So are you saying that you want to have this definition apply to Chinatown?
The definition already applies to Chinatown. It's at the beginning. It says in the Chinatown mixed-use district, a retail use other than adult entertainment as defined in 890.306, et cetera. That was to apply other entertainment to the Eastern Neighborhoods district. Because she's not doing a much further expansion of the amusement game arcades, this isn't needed. She's narrowed it quite a bit to just affect the SLI district. So.
Got it. So you would withdraw this recommendation?
Well, the commission did not make that recommendation. That was the staff recommendation.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, colleagues, we've had public comment. We do have a potential for some discussion around this SLI amendment, or we also have a request for a continuance for 1 week to the Land Use Committee meeting for February 13th. Motions? Oh, I'm sorry. You know what? I didn't close public comment. Thank you, Supervisor Tang. Anybody else wish to comment on item 3?
Hi, Supervisors. My name is Hassan Mahmood. I am actually one of the folks that the Commissioner of Kim's office have allowed us to put this forward with you. I'm the business owner of Coin Op Game Room, located on 4th and Bryant Street, which is in the SLI district. I do understand the concerns about gambling and crime related to natures of such places, but that was about 35 years ago, and I think the city is involved a good amount since. What we're putting forth is not necessarily an amusement arcade. It is a bar and restaurant that has arcade as an accessory to our use. Of course, it kind of goes down to necessity when it comes to land use, and from what I understand, the general plan of the Planning Commission is to allow for SLI to remain the same, to be open to mixed uses, and I do understand that there's a good amount of housing that came in and kind of put a halt on exactly what this is going to be, but when I also look at the subway coming in on the 4th Street corridor, and it kind of opens up to more for mixed use and for uses such as this. Pardon me, I'm stumbling my words. I'm a little nervous here standing in front of you. At this point, the Eastern Soma, in terms of necessity, is a home to a lot of millennials. The crime rate doesn't seem to be the driving factor over there. Per amusement arcade games, Soma is home to some of the biggest gaming companies in the world, from Electronic Arts to Ubisoft, Double Fine, just all within a 3-block radius of us. And I think it's worth taking a look at amending to this SLI district. It's a small district from 3rd and 4th, from Harrison to Townsend. And it is mixed use, and it's thriving, and I think it kind of puts a stop on the growth of the area for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other members of the public wish to comment on item number 3? And please, if there are more members, please come on up, and everyone's going to have 2 minutes.
Hi, good afternoon. My name's Eric. I've worked at restaurant and bars that have had arcades in them for over 5 years now. And what I've seen is it just brings a sense of community and positivity. It lets people meet each other and just have fun. And I just hope that everyone feels the same way, and it's just a fun environment for everyone to kind of to be in. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Next speaker.
Yes, thank you. My name is Ben Bogosian. I am a resident of San Francisco for a couple years now. I am a frequent of the area around the potential new games in Coin Op Game Room, and it is a very up-and-coming area, and the games would provide a great, wholesome sense of community and a great place for people to get together and do great things. So hopefully the opportunity can be presented.
Thanks very much. Next speaker, please. I grew up going to Pier 39 Arcade.
Hi there. My name is Carly Shear. I'm also a resident of San Francisco area, specifically Soma. I just really think that I've been to Coin Op. I think it's just it's something that the city and that community needs. There's not much else that pulls you over into that area besides, like baseball games and such. And it's something that, with such a tech-savvy community that we have here in the city, is that something that we're lacking. I also feel that it will, bring that nostalgic, level back to the city with the, Pac-Man and bringing these games that people grew up with. And I think that's really important too, to kind of bridge these generations and kind of bring this community together.
Thanks very much. Next speaker, please.
Hi, my name is James Lyles, and I'm a resident of San Francisco. I visited Coin Op some time ago, and I found that that space is truly a call to action to the local residents in the Soma for public space, as well as their interests that they identify with. I fully support everything that they're doing in the location. It's a beautiful, well-constructed, well-thought space that's being limited by antiquated laws that they're really trying to petition from the board to get some change so our community can continue to evolve and move forward. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Next speaker, please.
Hi, my name is Justine Bawley. I'm a resident of San Francisco. I grew up here and also in Oakland. And I've been to Coin Op quite a few times, and I've actually found it to be very safe, inviting, very inclusive of kind of all types of groups. The younger generation, I've seen a few older generations. I've brought my dad in with me, and he absolutely loved the games that they have. And I feel that their potential to grow and to be this like staple of San Francisco is limited. That they could definitely have a few more games, and it would definitely bring in more people to be like, oh, I remember playing that game when I was like 16 kind of thing. So hopefully you guys change your minds. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Next speaker, please.
Hi, my name is Paulina Carnes, and I'm also a local resident. I just wanted to tell you a little bit about my experience with Coin Op Game Room. My wife is an air traffic controller, which I can assume is I know it's a very stressful job. And her and I actually go into Coin Op all the time because they have the basketball games where you shoot the hoops and you're side by side, and we compete together, and it's absolutely fantastic. And then go play a bunch of pinball games and eat some corn dogs and have a local pint. So for me, and with my wife with such a hard and difficult, stressful job, I think it's been a really great addition to our lives, going there and being able to relax and talking to a bunch of different people from everywhere in the community. Everybody's been really, really kind and supportive, and it's a super inclusive place. And I just hope there's more games there and you allow us to do that. Thanks so much.
Thanks very much. Anybody else wish to comment on item number 3 in public comment? Okay, seeing none, public comment is closed. Supervisor Tang?
Thank you. Thanks to everyone who came out. And speaking of antiquated codes, I'll just say that it was a recent discovery of mine that according to our San Francisco Police Code, we actually can't conduct bingo games unless you're a nonprofit charitable organization. So I will be bringing something forth to that effect to allow us to play bingo as well in our establishment. But in any case, I'll honor Supervisor Kim's office request to continue this item for 1 week.
Okay, motion by Supervisor Tang. Feel the same way. We'll absolutely honor the district supervisor's request. As I was telling Supervisor Peskin, I grew up playing video games on Pier 39 in his district, and look forward to the for-profit bingo games coming to the city of San Francisco soon. With that, Supervisor Peskin, could I have a second for that motion?
So moved.
Motion by Supervisor Tang, second by Supervisor Peskin. We could take it without objection. All right, Madam Clerk, would you call items 4 and 5 together, please?
Item numbers 4 and 5 are an ordinance and resolution that waive fees and exempt requirements for a project at 950 to 974 Market Street in exchange for a dedication of property at 180 Jones Street or the construction of affordable housing or efficiency rental units at 180 Jones Street, establishing the 180 Jones Street Affordable Housing Fund and accepting a $2 million gift to this fund, approving an agreement for the conveyance of property, and making appropriate findings.
Okay, thank you very much. So these items were sponsored by Supervisor Kim, so we'll let her kick off the conversation.
Thank you, Chair Farrell, and thank you to the members of Land Use Committee, Supervisors Tang and Peskin, for hearing this item today. I'm really excited to be here in support of a legislation I introduced last fall that dedicates land at 180 Jones, currently just a parking lot in the Tenderloin neighborhood and one of the last remaining developable parcels in this neighborhood, to create a minimum of 60 units of step-up affordable housing for single-room occupancy tenant residents in the neighborhood. The project sponsor for 950 Market Street, Group I, who is here today in attendance, worked very closely with the Tenderloin community and our office on coming up with a negotiated affordable housing proposal that worked for our residents. While I generally always prefer on-site affordable housing in any market rate development, many of the residents of the Tenderloin were concerned that they would not be able to afford the level of affordability required for home ownership units in the 950 Market Street project. So the developer worked closely with the community, listening to their ideas and proposals, and went out and sought the acquisition of 180 Jones, a parcel that many of our Tenderloin residents had looked at, hoping that 100% affordable housing could be there. The primary project at 950 and 180 Jones is important to the revitalization of our mid-market and Tenderloin area. The value of the land purchase and contribution to the fund that we are proposing today in the ordinance is approximately 25% of the on-site affordable housing obligation. On top of that, this legislation also includes seed funding of $300,000 to support the creation of a Compton's District TLGB, recognizing the history of the transgender and LGBT community in the history and present day of the Tenderloin neighborhood. $100,000 to support the creation of a TLGB Cultural Heritage District, another $100,000 to create a transgender-focused community facility in the Tenderloin, and finally another $100,000 to support transgender-focused commercial or nonprofit storefront in the Compton's neighborhood. I will be making a series of amendments to the legislation today, and I apologize, we just got those amendments, so our land use legislative staffer, April Ang, is quickly working to get that to the committee today. But before we go into public comment, I did really want to thank our 950 Market Coalition, which includes Central City SRO Collaborative, many of who I see here in the audience today. I want to recognize Market Street for the Masses, the Compton's Coalition, the staff of the Mayor's Office of Housing, Kate Hartley, Olson Lee, Jeff Buckley, Department of Real Estate, Planning and OEWD, the City Attorney, and of course our project sponsor Joy Au and her team. And just in listing all those people and departments, you can get a sense of how complex and big this development project was and how many different parties had to come together to make this a reality. So I really do want to congratulate the developer who is here today. This project was many years in the coming. We started talking about this in 2011 when we first introduced the mid-market tax exclusion, a great hope for the 900 block of Market Street. And now it's really exciting that we're going to be able to approve this deal today, which will not only bring hotel and market rate units and more housing to the neighborhood, but a dedicated site for 100% affordable housing in the Tenderloin neighborhood that will in particular be dedicated to our single-room occupancy tenants that are looking to move up in the affordable housing ladder. So, again, I will be making some amendments, but while we get those amendments ready, if there are questions from committee members, would be happy to take those now, and of course, looking forward to hearing from the members of the public.
Thank you, Supervisor Kim. Supervisor Tang.
Thank you, and I'm sure that we're going to get more clarity when we see the amendments, but I was wondering if, through the chair to Supervisor Kim, if you could state kind of exactly what the deal has been.
Sure. Thank you for asking. We do have to make some amendments here today, but the obligation that the developer would owe the city in building off-site affordable housing without this proposal today would have been $15.4 million. Now, we knew that that was not enough funding to cover the actual development at 180 Jones. And so the community worked very closely with the developer, and we were able to negotiate a $2.7 million gift on top of the $15.4 million obligation from the developer that will help us close the gap in meeting this development proposal. And based on the numbers that planning gave to our office in December, the gap is actually less than $1 million today. This is, again, according to a planning memo that we got a little over a month ago. Now, on top of this $18.1 million contribution, minus the purchase of the land costs, which the developer has gone out and acquired, there is also an additional $300,000 that is being dedicated to the creation of a Compton's District transgender, lesbian, gay, bisexual historic district in the Tenderloin, Mid-Market, and South of Market area. And so those two components are the major components of the negotiated deal.
Thank you. And you mentioned that the gap is less than $1 million now in terms of the 180 Jones project. So I guess I'm hearing differently, and so I'm wondering if you or Mayor's Office of Housing can speak to what exactly that gap is and how we actually plan to address it.
So why don't we ask Kate Hartley from Mayor's Office of Housing to come up? I think I had similar kind of questions about this at this point.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Kate Hartley. Supervisor Kim is correct. When we began working on this negotiation or were brought into this transaction, we ran pro forma to price the value of building 68 units of affordable housing at 180 Jones. And we used regular assumptions of what we could leverage in tax credits and debt, assuming that we could get an allocation of project-based vouchers that could serve formerly homeless veterans. And we came up with a number that was that with the Section 415, 413, and these leveraged funds would cover the cost of the program. Now, subsequently, there was a correction to the jobs housing linkage fee, and so that left us a small gap. And then subsequent to that, we've had an additional $700,000 in gift funds from the developer, which is great. It makes up a portion of the gap in the neighborhood of $800,000. The problem and the reason why you're hearing that the gap is actually larger is because in the meantime, while all these discussions were going on, Donald Trump was elected president with a promise of tax reform. And the low-income housing tax credit market, upon which we rely heavily for every single one of our affordable housing deals, has dropped down quite significantly. So in addition to this approximately $800,000 gap that we have, all things being equal at the state of the original discussions, we have to price the low-income housing tax credits lower. And so we are looking at an overall funding gap of around $2.4 million. Now, this tax credit issue has nothing to do with this project. It's an industry-wide issue, and we're trying to address it as best we can. But I think that's the reason you're hearing different numbers in terms of gap.
Okay, so there was a difference before, I thought of about a 1.4 million, so it's actually just 800-something thousand, 860, before your tax credit issue.
Yes, and then that was mitigated by the additional gift funds that the developer agreed to.
So given, through the chair.
No, go ahead.
So given what you had just stated, again, the changes at the federal level that are kind of beyond anyone's control here, the gap is slightly larger than the 860,000. And so what are the plans then to address this shortfall?
Well, we're looking at this issue across the whole pipeline. In this case, in some cases this is creating larger problems than $2.5 million. But because the value of this gap is relatively low, given the total development costs that we've projected and the amount of funds coming into the project from the developer and the fact that the land is part of that contribution, I believe, given our history of financing, that we should be able to bridge that gap with other sources of funds, other inclusionary monies, other jobs housing linkage, as well as housing trust funds. So at that level, when gaps are $3 million or less, we're usually able to provide the financing to make a project happen.
And then one last question here. I'm looking at the timing for when the various funds are supposed to be distributed by the developer, and a large bulk of it, 12 million, would go towards the 180 Jones Affordable Housing Fund at temporary certificate of occupancy. I'm wondering if, given this shortfall of about 2 million or so, whether moving the 12 million, I don't know if it was discussed already, but if moving that 12 million up earlier would help.
Well, I believe that the ordinance requires in addition to the acquisition of the land, an initial disbursement of $1.5 million for pre-development expenses, and that would allow us to get going quickly on the transaction. And then we wouldn't actually be in need of GAP funds until we were through entitlements, and we do have to re-entitle this project. So I actually don't think having all of the money in hand right away is something that would make a difference to us.
Okay, thank you.
Supervisor Peskin.
So just to put that in real time numbers, insofar as the $1.5 million for pre-development costs comes at first construction, presumably, I assume that's when they pull their first permits, what's the duration of the construction period until temporary certificate of occupancy?
I would defer to the developer, but I believe it's approximately 18 to 24 months.
Okay.
So I guess I have a few questions. First of all, the table 2, and perhaps there are updated numbers, but this is based upon your letter from December 9th from the Planning Commission staff. So there was a few things. First of all, there's a non-potable water system cost exemption here on this project to the tune of a benefit of about $1.75 million. Can you talk about that in relation to this project? I understand it's on the market rate project, not the affordable housing part of the project. Why are we, after passing that law, why are we doing this?
I would like to defer to my planning colleagues if I could on that issue.
Okay. To our planning department.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Anne-Marie Rogers, Planning Department staff. While that requirement is normally due for this particular project, it was not addressed before the Planning Commission. It was just part of the exemptions. The Commission had some overall question about the relative value of the exemptions that would be granted to the project compared to the public benefits that would be delivered to the city in the form of this unique affordable housing project. And unlike many times when we see a project, they clearly meet the Section 415 affordable housing requirements. In this case, it was, as I mentioned, this unique affordable housing product that didn't match up in AMIs or unit sizes in the way we normally compare. So the Commission requested more information about the fiscal analysis. We worked with the project sponsor to get the cost of how much they thought the gray water requirement would have cost if they needed to put it in the building, and compared that to the benefit that would be provided to the city through the affordable housing project. So all this was provided to you because the Commission didn't have the benefit of a thoroughly vetted development agreement that came through OEWD. They felt very comfortable with the project, and they did recommend approval of the project, but they just asked that staff work with the project sponsor and MOHCD to provide the board with additional information so that you could understand the deal in full.
Okay. I mean, again, let me say I'm very excited about the project, about the new units, the hotel space, the affordable housing project. I guess I'm still confused about why we passed an ordinance and then there's an exemption to it kind of pretty shortly thereafter. In terms of any project, I'm glad that we got that information. There was a planning department or planning commission perhaps didn't look at it super closely. But so I'm going to ask that again, and then, but the second part, I guess, the main thrust from my perspective is in the table 2 that you showed me, and perhaps there are updated numbers from Supervisor Kim's office, but this table 2, the surplus as originally designed, with original code was about $14.7 million without the proposed ordinance. And now the developer's making $17.1 million. So we have, it looks like...
18.1, sorry.
18. Okay, so even more. So the developer's making X million dollars more based upon this project, which I like, obviously very enthusiastic about more affordable housing units. But if we're still talking about here today that we still have a funding shortfall on the actual project itself, and the opportunity to pay for that is to dip into other funds that could be used elsewhere. These aren't dollars that are just sitting around, that wouldn't otherwise be used. We could build affordable housing units elsewhere. Why are we allowing a project to go forward knowing that there's a funding gap and knowing that the developer, based upon this ordinance, is actually making millions of dollars more? Again, I don't mind developer profits, that's fine, but compared to the status quo, look, we've had these in my district as well, but when we have land use projects, if we're going to have alternate projects based upon community needs and desires, great. But to turn around and say to the developer, therefore you're going to get millions of dollars off your project, that to me is something I think is very difficult to stomach, especially in light of the fact that it seems there be a funding gap here. To me, so long as it's cost neutral to a developer, I think we should always explore new options. But to say this, otherwise you have the potential of the comment of a developer giveaway, and I don't think that's something we should be doing. So I just want to kind of ask about that line.
Well, I agree with the premises and the goals. What I will say is that we and the planning department, myself, my department, worked to put this December 9th letter together in answer to the Planning Commission's questions, but also for our own benefit of analyzing the project and seeing what makes sense and how this transaction should move forward. The developer had a response to this and said that the projected market rate unit revenue that we were using, based upon a table that a third-party consultant provided, was overly aggressive. And they said, you are assuming an inflation rate to the sales revenue that will be available in 2019 that's unrealistic. They made a good point, because we do know that interest rates are rising and the market is softening for this kind of housing. However, we don't know. On the other hand, you do have tax reform, and it's possible that high-income households are going to have more money to spend, and so perhaps prices might continue to rise as they have in the past. It's really an unknown, but that was their counterpoint to what we had assumed. There were other elements to the financial analysis, the cost of funds, for example. We assumed a certain interest rate on their construction and their construction loan money, and they came back and said that, in fact, their money was much more expensive than what we had projected. Now, we don't have access to all of their underwriting assumptions, but that's, certainly could be a very legitimate correction to what we assumed. So where we landed was that we had estimated that there was a benefit conferred on the developer of $2.4 million for doing this ordinance. They said, in fact, that they were doing worse and that their preference was always to do the on-site inclusionary. But because of community requests, they have moved forward with the acquisition of 180 Jones. I hate to not have a good answer for you, but I have to say that we don't really know what their surplus or shortfall will be in 2019. We don't really know exactly where sales prices will be in 2019. From MoCD's perspective, we did want to honor the request of the community to have the 68 units of affordable housing, and so this is where the transaction landed.
So again, I understand that. I guess from our point of view, now this is my first land use committee meeting, but when budget committee, we had our budget legislative analysts provide us as a board of supervisors with data that we are to be relying upon as a city. And so, third parties, whether it be developers in a land use situation or other parties, might always dispute it, but we're here to rely on data provided to us by our city departments, and this is the data that we have in front of us from you, from our planning department. So it's difficult to say that it's a great idea that we're going forward with this because somebody's disputing the data that the city's provided. All right, I'll relax for a second here. Supervisor Peskin.
Thank you, Chair Farrell. Is there somebody here who can tell us how you came up with the TDR exemption calculation in the amount of $700,000? That's how many TDRs at what unit value?
Supervisor Peskin, Claudine Asma, planning staff. That was based on the market rate of what TDRs are going for. The developer will be paying for the difference between the 6 to 1 FAR going up to 9. But there's an amount that's over 26,000 square feet approximately, that because the original project would have had that floor area exempted because it was BMR, we just calculated out how much that amount would be based on market rate for TDRs today.
So what TDR district are we in, and how many TDRs at how much a unit did you come up with $700,000?
I believe we used a calculation of about $25 per gross square foot.
And what zoning district are we in?
We're in C3G.
And how many TDRs are out there in the market in the C3G?
I would have to look into that and get back to you.
I thought the going rate for those was about $35, not $25.
I can look into that for you.
And then the documents indicate that as to the non-potable water cost credit, that the figure was based on a written estimate provided by the project sponsor. Have you independently verified that?
The planning department has not.
Good afternoon again.
Has the
Emery
Mayor's
Rogers.
Office of Housing or any other party?
No, we reached out to PUC and the Department of Public Health, both of whom are involved in the implementation of the gray water ordinance, but they are not developers and they have no familiarity with the actual costs, so they couldn't help us confirm that estimate.
So we haven't gotten a third-party consultant to take a look at that who has expertise in that field?
No, sir, that would be the benefit of going through the formal development agreement, is the city does have the time to hire the consultant. In this case, this ordinance was introduced in the fall, and we were really rushing to bring it to hearing for the Plan Commission in November.
Thank you.
So can I ask you as a follow-up then to Supervisor Peskin's question, have we, this disputed analysis about, just Ms. Hartley, about your financial analysis, have you seen the developer's projections? Has a city been given that?
I haven't seen full projections. I've seen a summary in response to our summary. And then there was a full third-party analysis, which we relied on. But then the developer said, well, you relied on the most aggressive assumptions that the third-party analyst came up with. And so we used what we had.
Okay. Supervisor Kim.
Yes, I did want to talk about certain components of the deal, and just so you know, the Land Use Committee is aware, we have 3 major development projects in the mid-market arena. The first was 1066 Market, the Shorenstein development on the parking lot, which many of you are aware of, that faces Golden Gate and also has a frontage on Market Street. We and the community negotiated that deal prior. It was also an off-site land acquisition deal, which was the former Post Office 101 Hyde. And in that deal as well, Shorenstein committed to the majority of the funding that would be needed to fund 100% affordable housing on that site. By the way, that site was actually entitled to be market rate units, but Shorenstein was able to purchase the site from the previous property owner and now has deeded that land to the city to build affordable housing. But Shorenstein did not cover 100% of that project. So when 950 Market came to us, we wanted to be consistent in these 2 deals. The community, again, asked that we off-site these affordable below market rate units, acknowledging that most Tenderloin residents don't meet 80% of average median income, which is the income bracket that the home ownership BMR units would have gone towards. While normally I prefer on-site, I recognize the fact that these 2 projects were in a neighborhood where the AMI is far lower than what the city requires for BMR units. So in these 2 cases, working with the community, we provided this exceptions. But we have been consistent in these 2 deals. We have a third one coming to us, 1028 Market. We want to make sure that all 3 developers are making equal contributions based on what they're building into the neighborhood. So I just wanted to give a little history to how this off-site land deal works. And we would not have done it without a commitment from the Mayor's Office of Housing to work with us on the full construction of these 2 projects and their ability to include this in their project pipeline. But I did want to give the developer an opportunity to speak to the projections that were presented by the planning department and also on their request for the gray water exemption. By the way, their project, really did begin very early in 2013. It has taken, over 3 years for them to come to an approval process due to the complexity of the project and the size of the project, which is why we honored their request. But we did recapture that value in the affordable housing gift to the city. So I'm not sure if it is Ms. Au or Mr. Vettel would like to respond to some of the concerns that Chair Farrell has brought forward.
Thank you, Supervisor Farrell. A couple of things. I did want to call your attention to the December 15th letter from Group I to the Clerk of the Board and to Supervisor Kim that responds to the December 8 memo. And that does include our projections, which we think are more realistic as far as purchase prices and interest rates and construction costs going into 2019. I mean, the bottom line here is that
I just say I don't have that in front of me, so I'll take it. I'll take your word that it's there.
I have a copy here I can pass
Great.
out. You know, the bottom line is that we started proposing 31 on-site units in compliance with the Affordable Housing Ordinance. When Supervisor Kim and the community came to us and said, let's look at an alternative, we were very much willing to do that. At a certain point, if the alternative becomes too expensive to do, we need to default back to the 31 on-site units. So that's sort of this balancing act we're trying to achieve. We think we're there. We think, and in fact, the balance includes a $2.7 million gift from the developer to the city.
So I understand that perspective, and I get it, right? As I'm sitting here in the Land Use Committee, the only document I have from the city, which I should be relying on from our departments, is that the developer, yourself, is making millions of dollars more based upon this reconstruct, the offsite. And so it's a challenge for me to sit here. Sure. And oh, by the way, there's an identified funding gap that's getting worse because of the Trump administration. Sure. So that's a challenge to sit here and say, yes, this is a good project to move forward based upon these numbers. Now, if there was some way to get verified numbers to get everyone on board on the same page, and that's, to me, is a different scenario. But so I get what you're saying, but as I'm sitting here today, I can't just rely on that.
And then one other point in response to Supervisor Peskin's question about the TDRs, it's sort of a wash, because if you do on-site affordable units, you get free FAR for those on-site affordable units. So we were going to have 23,000 square feet of on-site inclusionary units. We wouldn't have to buy TDR for those 23,000 square feet. This ordinance simply says you still don't have to buy those 23,000 square feet of TDR. So no matter what the value of those TDRs was, it's a wash between whether we got them free for doing on-site inclusionary or whether we got them free under this ordinance.
And what about the potable water number?
That was part of...
Or non-potable, I should say.
Part of the calculation as to what it would take to make it worthwhile for the developer to pursue this off-site option with the community. It was an extraordinary expense. It wasn't in our pro forma because of the delays that the project went through. There was a neg deck that was issued in January that was subsequently withdrawn when the city decided not to pursue the mid-market SUD. So then we lost 6 months over that. There was a subsequent neg deck issued in July. And then subsequent to that, the planning department staff decided they didn't like the design of the project and then delayed going to the commission for 3 or 4 months. The commission ultimately approved the design from June. So there was about a year of delay that was not the fault of the developer, which was associated with decisions of the city. So it was partly that, and it was partly just trying to get to a point where this offsite deal that the community wanted made sense.
Okay. I wish I could say that's the first time I heard that there's been delays. That's not the developer's fault in terms of project in the city. And again, either to planning or Mayor's Office of Housing or just Supervisor Kim, I appreciate the comments around the offsite versus the onsite. I think, or these other projects that have moved forward, and either it's my fault for not looking closer, but it's also we're now amending ordinances, not just approving a project, amending ordinances with known budget shortfalls here. And according again to the analysis that we have in front of us from our city department, that amended ordinance grants a mini windfall here to a developer that would cover the costs if there wasn't a windfall of building the affordable housing. And so that is the conundrum that I have in terms of looking at this project from the analysis that we have here today, and I will take a look at your letter. Supervisor Kim, are you still up on the mic? No? Okay. All right. Colleagues, if no other questions or comments from staff, Supervisor Kim, is that you?
Well, actually, I do have amendments ready to read, but I can also do that after public comment. We're making copies for all the committee members based on your preference, Chair Farrell.
Why don't you read them right now and people could include that in comment?
Great. So we have a series of amendments to make to the ordinance that will, one, delete the off-site option, two, changes the affordable housing commitment from $18.8 million to $18.1 million, and three, creates the Compton's District TLGB Stabilization Fund at $30,000. And for the 180 Jones legislation, we are making an amendment that states that the conveyance of 180 Jones is to the Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development is for a total of $10, and also changes the number to reflect the commitment of $18.1 million. We also want to make we also have an amendment that expresses the intent of the board to reserve 50% of the future units at 180 Jones at 40% of average median income, and a preference for current residents of SRO tenants. And so we'll have the amendments ready for committee members, but the amendments largely state the numbers that I've just stated on the record.
Okay, thank you. Supervisor Tang?
Thank you. I think there were a couple other amendments recommended by the Planning Commission or staff. I can't remember, but one of them had to do with the timeline for, I believe, the delivery of the project at 180 Jones, and the second one, I believe, was around the AMI levels.
Sorry, which one are the two? Sorry.
These are Planning Commission or Planning staff recommendations. I just wanted to see if they're incorporated already or need to be still.
Yes, through the chair, Anne Marie Rogers, Planning Department staff. Supervisor Kim has made those requested amendments from the Planning Commission. They were concerned about AMIs. Should the developer be building it as an offsite project? And since the city is going to be developing it, it no longer needs clarification. And the last thing I would like to thank Supervisor Kim is for making those amendments and tightening up that language to ensure that if for some reason the conveyance did not go through or the fees didn't get paid, there's linkage back to the entitlements that have already been approved at the Commission.
So, Ms. Rogers, can I ask one question? So, given this discrepancy on the funding issues, given that we have a lack of funding to build the affordable units, given that we haven't verified ourselves their estimates on that we're using as our estimates for the potable water system, among other things, and I'm wondering if the onion doesn't get peeled back further, why are we pushing this forward right now with having done that analysis and everybody being on the same page here? It feels to me rushed.
This is certainly the decision that is before you. When this decision was before the Planning Commission, they appreciated the unique affordable development that would be provided at 180 Jones. They understood the optimism of MOHCD to come up with the fundings, and so they were willing to take a chance on it. But that same question is now before you. You've got some additional financial information and also some additional fiscal uncertainty, and so it's in your hands as our decision makers.
Okay, thanks. Colleagues, any further questions right now?
Oh. Yeah. Yeah.
Colleagues, can we go to public comment right now? Or any? Okay, we'll move on to public comment. Let's do that. Public comment for items 4 and 5. Please come on up. Everyone will have 2 minutes. Please feel free to line up against the far wall, and we will get going.
Hi, I'm here representing the Compton's Coalition, which is made up of transgender serving organizations in the TL, and I'm also a resident of the Tenderloin. We support this project and the legislation that will not only allow for the creation of units of affordable housing, but also create the first transgender district in the world. San Francisco, but in particular the Tenderloin, has long been a safe haven for transgender women of color and sex workers and other TLGB people who are often overlooked, policed, and subject to abuse by people outside of the community. We would like to thank everyone involved, both in this building and out there in the city, who has been working on the project and helping to make this historic district reality. We look forward to working with everyone in this room to make this thriving, historic, and safe neighborhood for the transgender community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
I'm Kevin Stahl. I'm with the Central City SRO Collaborative and the 950 Market Coalition that helped negotiate this community benefit agreement. First thing I want to say is, for the record, there was also another member of the 950 Market Coalition that Jane Kim forgot to mention, was TNDC was also part of our group, the Tenderloin Neighborhood Development Corporation. So I just want to make sure that's on the record. And as part of the 950 Market Coalition, we worked over a year and a half to make sure that we got affordable housing units out of this big major project that's going to really affect the neighborhood. Hopefully for the better, though, of course. And we want to thank Joy Al for really working with the community to make sure that we had a good benefit agreement and to that make sure these units are affordable for the residents of the Tenderloin, which are not able to afford higher price rents in the city, though. So I'm glad that hopefully this will be approved and go forward, and these new units will make sure they go to help make people's lives a lot better. So thank you very much.
Good afternoon, committee members. Thank you for hearing this matter. My name is Rio Sharf. I'm with the Central City SRO Collaborative, and I was a part of the 950 Market Coalition. So what you're reviewing before you today is the result of many years of negotiating process, one of the most community-informed community benefits agreement processes that any of us are aware of in this city's history. It is a negotiation, it is a compromise that was struck that had to weigh many different values of different parts of our community, and we are really celebrating the fact that we've arrived at a conclusion that benefits so many different parts of our community, low-income tenants, formerly homeless tenants, TLGB community as well, and the developer has been very receptive and responsive to a lot of our needs. So most of all, among those needs was a need for affordable housing. Generally, Tenderloin Housing Clinic, where I work, is open to supporting projects simply with their inclusionary affordable housing commitment that follows city law. But in this case, because the Tenderloin is such a dramatically lower income neighborhood than others in the city, we felt it necessary to find a compromise that would allow for much more deeply affordable housing in the Tenderloin. And so rather than having 80% AMI units, we're now going to have twice as many units constructed at much deeper affordability levels. And we feel very confident that that'll be an overall benefit to the community. We understand there's some concern about the gray water exemption, but it was necessary in this case to figure out a compromise that would allow for affordable housing that was meaningful to the community to be created. And this gray water exemption is a useful compromise that's going to allow affordable housing to be built. And we feel like the overall benefit is very much worthwhile. We have reviewed the data for months. We feel very confident that this entails a major commitment from the developers to our community. And if we did not feel confident in that, we would not be here to support this project as a whole. So please help us wrap up this multi-year community-informed process, and let's get going. Let's get shovels in the ground to build these 60-plus affordable units in the Tenderloin. We all know it's much needed. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please. By the way, if there are any other members of the public that wish to speak on this item, please feel free to line up on the far wall.
David Elliott Lewis, member of Central City SRO Collaborative, and part of the negotiating process for the last almost 2 years, member of the 950 Market Street Coalition. This project, this development, both at 950 Market and 180 Jones, this is the first development in my personal history of advocacy that I've ever advocated for. I normally would be against developments like this. This is 500 units coming up on Market Street, half hotel, half condo, right in the Tenderloin. And I would have seen it as an affront to the Tenderloin and to poor people, but not this one. When I look at what the developer, Joy O and Group I, have finally delivered in terms of step-up housing at 180 Jones, a workforce development agreement, Magic Theater, an opportunity for neighborhood children to learn theater skills, and a TLGBT $300,000 benefit. When I look at the collection of these benefits, I believe that they justify the project, and I'm here to advocate for it, and I hope you will pass it, Jane Kim's amendments, unanimously. I understand there's uncertainty about the value of the gray water exemption, and we struggled with that too when we looked at it. And it's true, we don't actually know how much profit the developer will make. And I don't think anyone could actually honestly say how much they're going to make. But given that, I hope you don't let those uncertainties keep you from voting for this project. And wanted to thank Supervisor Kim for all of her work and her support. We wouldn't have gotten this far without it. And thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hi, Laura Clark, formerly Grow San Francisco, but now YIMBY Action. You know, I'm coming out to support this project, but I think that there are a lot of problems with it. The developer has maxed out their contributions to certain politicians, Jane Kim, who's putting forward this piece. And I appreciate that Aaron Peskin is trying to get developers out of politics, trying to say developers shouldn't be donating to campaigns. But if we want to get developers out of politics, we need to take the politics out of development. We need to stop making these case-by-case decisions. A lot of people spoke about the multiple years that it took to hammer out this negotiation. That is time wasted. That is time lost. We are in a housing shortage, a crisis. The rules need to be the rules. If you follow the rules, you get your permits. And while I think this housing desperately needs to be built, and we do not have time to go back and scrap this and renegotiate, we need to make this process faster and fairer and not cast a shadow on projects like this, because they know they have to make donations in order to ensure that their projects get through the process. If we are going to have a fair and equitable system where the housing that is so desperately needed actually gets built, we need to follow our own rules. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hi, my name is Sonia. I live at 603 Natoma Street. I support this project. I look forward to it passing, finally. I'm actually kind of here because I miss one of the original versions, which had a height limit increase. I don't see why we didn't do that. There could have been even more profit surplus for everyone to argue about, you know, and even more community benefit with really no downside at all, because there's no downside to having increased height. But, you know, nonetheless, here we are. I support this project. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Any other members of the public who wish to comment on items 4 or 5? Okay, seeing none, public comment is closed. Supervisor Peskin.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to move the amendments to items 4 and 5 as presented by the sponsor, Supervisor Kim.
So we have a motion on the amendments, and I am happy to support that. Motion by Supervisor Peskin, second by Supervisor Tang. We can take those without objection. Again, I'm excited about this project as well. I still have outlying concerns right now, just to be perfectly blunt. Certainly, in land use here, I think we should be relying upon our city's projections, and it's something that we need to work with our developers on and to come up with some consensus about what's right. But right now, I wouldn't be supporting this in its current form, knowing that we are passing an ordinance that, according to the city's numbers, we are giving a multi-million-dollar benefit to a developer, and then knowing in our face that we have a multi-million-dollar shortfall to build the affordable housing that we're talking about, which is so awesome. So I personally would be in favor of a continuance to get those numbers ironed out and hopefully support a project that we can all get behind. But colleagues, I will leave it up to your discretion for further comments. Supervisor Peskin.
Thank you, Chair Farrell. First of all, let me just express some exception to one of the commenters relative to allegations made that I think are unfounded, untrue, and unfair. And now that I've gotten that off of my chest, let me concur with Chair Farrell that I think there is some unexplained issues here relative to the gap and relative to how certain numbers, particularly the non-potable water that has not been independently verified, have been arrived at. And I would respectfully join with Supervisor Farrell in having a short continuance, and maybe the parties could get together and try to help us reduce, if not eliminate, the aforementioned gap. And clearly, in hearing testimony from the Mayor's Office of Housing and Planning, there is a little dynamic tension that needs to be resolved by what was said and not said. So with that, I would be supportive of, I don't know, is 2 weeks a reasonable amount of time for folks to get to the table and work stuff out?
I'll put it back to our planning department and Mayor's Office of Housing. We could continue this to the call of the chair. We could continue this to a date certain. That's fine. I'm committed to bringing this forward and want to see this project through as quickly as possible. But again, these numbers, they simply don't add up today. But I would defer if there's a comment or opinion from our staff about the timing involved here. I want to give you the right time, but I don't want to delay the building of affordable housing any more than it needs to be.
Chair Farrell, I'd like to point out 2 weeks from now would be a holiday, so it would be 1 to 3.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Would 1 week be enough?
Well, we would have to sit down with the developer and review their numbers. As I said, we received a summary, which you have now, or on December 15th, it was sent to the board. But, you know, we had some questions about it, and so we'd have to have the opportunity to sit down with them and really kind of dig in. And also in terms of pricing the non-potable water, I can check with my colleagues who do construction management to see if we have comps. But again, if the developer has evidence of the pricing that they've assumed, whether through a bid or something else, that would really help.
So let me ask you more specifically then.
Is 1 week
Is
okay?
1 week enough? Or if not, we're looking at 3 weeks. And I'm fine. I want to do this expeditiously. There's a tension here between doing it expeditiously, but obviously the reason at least I and Supervisor Peskin are having questions about this is that the analysis wasn't done and needs to get done in order for this to go forward.
Agreed. 1 week, we'd have to just, I'm not sure, because we're reliant on the developer to provide their
I tell you
financial
what,
numbers.
let me suggest this. We can do it for 1 week, and if by chance next Monday y'all haven't gotten it done, then we can do it again.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Supervisor Tang.
Thank you. So I do understand a lot of time and energy has gone into negotiating this deal, and I'm very appreciative of Supervisor Kim's office really, paying attention to what the community needs and trying to find a project that delivers that. I think in our kind of financial hawk type situation here, I would also support a continuance just because it's not. All of the details behind the agreement are not as what would be as transparent as, say, with a formal development agreement that might come through an OAWD or so forth. So in that case, then I would like this extra time to explore how it is we could address the funding gap.
So to that end, I guess going forward as well here with land use, I guess I would ask our planning staff as well that either we have development agreements that are fully fleshed out like this, but I think situations like this are unfortunate, probably from an expectation from a developer or certainly working with city staff or certainly our committee. I want to put us all in a position to succeed here and build this housing as quickly as we can. And again, my main concern is this funding gap and how we're going to get this knocked out for this project on Jones. So with that, do I have a specific motion then to continue this item for 1 week?
Can I make a comment?
Oh, sorry. Supervisor Kim. And let me also say on the microphone, again, appreciating Supervisor Kim's work on this. Obviously, we wouldn't be here today without it. I think hopefully this is just some last details. Supervisor Kim?
Okay, I wanted the utmost clarity on terms of the answers that are expected within the week's time for the 1 week continuance. You know, our office has been working on this ordinance for the past several months. And I also want to just ensure that the Land Use Committee takes into account our other development agreements, in particular for 1066 Market, Shorenstein, which is just next door. We do what we can to ensure that we are maximizing the contribution from our market rate developers. I have been the foremost advocate and the biggest fighter for affordable housing in our district, and we want to make sure that we are getting the maximum that we can from our developers, but we also want to be fair and consistent and not ask certain developers for more than others. And these concerns were just not brought up when we had 1066 Market, despite the fact that the deal is very, very similar in terms of what is being brought forward to the Board of Supervisors. But if we can have a very clear understanding of what answers are expected by next week at Land Use, I would really ask the Land Use Committee not to continue it more than a week, just because this project has seen so many delays, and we want this housing to get built. But if we could be very specific about what clarification we would like to have between Planning, Mayor's Office of Housing, and the developer by next Monday, we will work expeditiously with all the partners to make sure those answers are provided.
So I can only speak for myself and all my other colleagues on the committee, but what I would like is a consensus understanding of table number 2 from December 9th and what that looks like today. including verification of any experts we need, but it's not the developer saying these are our estimates and us saying, well, we don't know, we haven't looked at it, and it's not the city putting forth numbers and developer arguing immensely that those numbers are wrong. So to bring forward to the committee, and I think what we're looking for, quite frankly, is our city's opinion upon what those numbers are ultimately. And if that can be informed by working with the developer, awesome. If it needs to be with third-party evaluators, great. But the point is coming forth with a document that our Mayor's Office of Housing and our Planning Department can stand behind and say, these are the numbers we believe. That's what I would like to see.
Is that it from all the committee members?
Supervisor Tang?
We heard a little bit of this today from MOHCD, but just a real clear path as to how it is that we are going to address whatever that funding gap may be. I don't know if there's going to be any impacts on any other projects in the pipeline as well, so just an explanation of that.
Sorry, and let me add to Supervisor Kim, it's a fair point. I think on top of that analysis, it's literally an approach to say, why are we supporting a project like this if the numbers still look net positive to the tune of millions of dollars to a developer when we know that the affordable housing project that we're all touting as a result of this actually has a multi-million-dollar funding gap? Why are we doing that? Hopefully the answer is we're not doing that anymore, but if that's the case, I would like to understand why.
So I would just add to that I acknowledge the great work of the community and particularly of Supervisor Kim's office. The problem I have is when the city experts that we engage who are supposed to, who are saying, well, the developer responded with a different interest rate estimate. We did not independently verify the non-potable water discount in the amount of $1,750,000. I do buy Mr. Vettel's argument about the TDRs, but it just seems to me that when we do a cutting-edge deal like this, which I absolutely support, and I think 180 Jones is a better workout than the on-site alternative because it produces a minimum of 60 units and probably more, that the planning department staff and the mayor's office of housing staff, rather than saying, we don't know, we're not sure, it's their numbers versus actually not our numbers, we're not sure. It seems like they need to do a better job before we make a decision. And if they can sharpen their pencils in a week, my inclination is to support this very creative transaction that ultimately is going to bring more affordable units to a community that absolutely needs them. But it would be nice if we saw a little bit better work out of our city staff.
With that, motion to continue this item for 1 week by Supervisor Peskin, second by Supervisor Tang. We take that without objection. Okay, Madam Clerk, do we have any other business in front of us?
No, that concludes our business for today.
Okay, thank you, everybody. We're adjourned.